The rain in Asakusa doesn't fall. It seeps. It finds its way through the narrow alleys between century-old temples and modern convenience stores, pooling in corners where the city forgets to look. Isamu Nakamura stood beneath a broken awning outside a closed ramen shop, watching the water collect in the street below. His coat was soaked. His shoes had stopped being waterproof 3 years ago, around the time his marriage ended and his license as a corporate investigator was quietly revoked. He was 41, but looked 50. The kind of man people forgot 5 seconds after meeting him, which was exactly why he was good at his job. The phone in his pocket buzzed. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Nakamura? The voice was female, controlled, with the careful diction of someone used to giving orders. My name is Dr. Mizuki Sato. I need a private investigator. Someone discreet. Someone who won't ask questions. I ask plenty of questions, Isamu said. That's what you pay for. A pause. He could hear her breathing, calculating whether to trust him. My brother disappeared 8 months ago. The police closed the case after 2 weeks. They said he ran away from debt. But I know my brother. He wouldn't run. He would fight. Isamu had heard variations of this story 1,000 times. Families always believed their missing loved ones were victims of circumstance, not choice. They were usually wrong. But there was something in her voice, not desperation, but certainty. The certainty of someone who had already grieved and moved past it, only to have doubt creep back in. Why now? He asked. If it's been 8 months? Because I found something. A document. In his apartment, hidden behind a loose tile in the bathroom. A name, a date, and a single sentence. If you're reading this, I'm already dead. But they'll say I'm alive. The rain intensified. Isamu watched a young girl, no more than 14, emerge from the darkness of an alley across the street. She was pushing a shopping cart filled with plastic bottles and aluminum cans. Her hair was matted. Her clothes hung on her frame like borrowed skin. She didn't seem to notice the rain. Where are you? Isamu asked. Shibuya Medical Center. I'm finishing a shift. Can you meet me in an hour? He agreed to a price, took her address, and ended the call. When he looked back across the street, the girl was gone. Only the shopping cart remained, abandoned in the rain. Mizuki Sato didn't look like someone whose brother had disappeared. She looked like someone who had never experienced inconvenience. Her white coat was pristine. Her hair was pulled back in a precise bun. Her hands, when she shook his, were steady and cold. The hands of a surgeon, Isamu thought. Someone used to cutting into flesh without hesitation. They sat in a small cafe near the hospital. It was nearly midnight. The place was empty, except for an old man reading a newspaper in the corner, and a young couple pretending to study but mostly staring at each other. His name was Kenji, Mizuki began, sliding a photograph across the table. He was 3 years older than me. He worked in finance, or at least that's what he told our parents. The photograph showed a man in his early 30s, handsome in the way that suggested he'd never had to work for anything. He was smiling at the camera, but his eyes weren't participating in the smile. What did he actually do? Isamu asked. I don't know. That's why I need you. She pulled out a second item, a small piece of paper, yellowed and creased. The handwriting was rushed, almost illegible. This is what I found. I've had it analyzed. The paper is from a specific batch manufactured between 2015 and 2017. The ink is from a fountain pen, expensive, Japanese-made, and the date on it, March 15th of last year, is exactly 1 week before he disappeared. Isamu studied the note. The sentence was haunting in its simplicity. If you're reading this, I'm already dead, but they'll say I'm alive. Who's they? He asked. That's what I need you to find out. And the police? What did they say about this note? Mizuki's jaw tightened. I never showed it to them. The detective assigned to Kenji's case. There was something wrong about him. He seemed to know things he shouldn't have known. Details about Kenji's finances, his apartment, his movements. Details I hadn't mentioned. When I tried to ask him about it, he became hostile. He told me to stop interfering with the investigation and go back to my job. Do you remember his name? Detective Yamamoto. Shibuya Precinct. Isamu made a mental note. In his experience, when police closed cases too quickly and became defensive when questioned, it usually meant one of two things. Either they were incompetent or they were paid to be. He was betting on the latter. "I need to see Kenji's apartment," Isamu said. "I still have the key. I've been paying the rent. The landlord thinks I'm planning to move in eventually." She slid another key across the table. "It's in Minato Ward, Building 7, Unit 304. The address is written on the tag." Isamu pocketed the key. "I'll need a retainer, 500,000 yen. After that, it's 50,000 a day plus expenses." She didn't negotiate. She simply opened her purse, withdrew an envelope, and placed it on the table. The thickness suggested she'd come prepared for exactly this amount. "One more thing," Mizuki said as Isamu stood to leave. "Be careful. After I found that note, I started asking questions too. Quietly. Just to people I thought might know something. Within a week, I was followed. Someone broke into my apartment. They didn't take anything. They just moved things, rearranged my books, left my bathroom light on. It was a message. A message saying what? Stop looking." Kenji's apartment was exactly what Isamu expected from a man with secrets, meticulously clean, almost sterile. The furniture was expensive but impersonal. There were no photographs on the walls, no books on the shelves, no evidence of a life being lived, only the performance of one. Isamu spent 3 hours going through the apartment methodically. He found nothing in the obvious places. No hidden documents in the desk, no cash in the mattress, no journals in the closet. But he did find something in the kitchen, behind the rice cooker. A business card, worn and creased, for a pachinko parlor in Kabukicho. On the back, in the same rushed handwriting as the note, was a single word: Yamamoto. The connection between Kenji and the detective was now confirmed, but the nature of that connection remained opaque. It was nearly 3 in the morning when Isamu left the apartment. The streets of Minato were empty, the rain finally stopping. He was walking toward the train station when he heard a voice, small, young, desperate. Mister, wait." He turned. It was the girl from Asakusa, the one with the shopping cart. But now she was standing in front of him, blocking his path, and her eyes were wide with something that looked like recognition. "You're looking for someone," she said. It wasn't a question. "How would you know that?" Isamu asked. "Because I know who's alive. I know who they say is dead." She glanced over her shoulder, as if checking for followers. "There's a sanctuary, old place near the river in Sumida. They keep people there, people who are supposed to be dead." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I was supposed to be dead too. I almost was, but someone saved me." She paused, and for a moment, her young face looked ancient. "If you go there, you'll find answers, but you have to go alone. And you have to go at night. During the day, it's just an old building. But at night..." She trailed off, as if the words couldn't capture what happened at night. "What's your name?" Isamu asked. "Yuki. And you should know, the man you're looking for, he's not the one in danger, the woman is." Before Isamu could respond, she turned and disappeared into the darkness, moving with the practiced silence of someone who had learned to vanish. Mizuki didn't answer his calls until dawn. When she did, her voice was tight with panic. "Someone was in my apartment again. But this time they left something. A photograph. It's Kenji. But he looks different, older, and he's with someone. A woman I don't recognize. They're in some kind of... I don't know. A basement? A warehouse? There's a date on the back. From last month." Isamu's mind was already moving through the implications. Kenji wasn't dead. He was hidden. And whoever was keeping him hidden had just made a critical mistake. They'd revealed that they knew Mizuki was looking for him. "Don't go to work today," Isamu said. "Pack a bag. I'm coming to get you." "Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe. And then we're going to find your brother." He didn't mention Yuki or the sanctuary or the cryptic warning about the woman in danger. He didn't mention that he suspected the woman in the photograph might be someone Mizuki knew. He didn't mention any of it because he was beginning to understand that this case had moved beyond a simple missing person investigation. This was about something much larger. Something that involved the police, organized crime, and a network of people hidden in plain sight. And somewhere in the middle of it all was a truth that someone had killed to keep buried. The pachinko parlor in Kabukicho was exactly the kind of place where secrets were currency. Neon signs flickered in the window, casting alternating shadows of red and blue across the street. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the mechanical cacophony of thousands of steel balls cascading through vertical boards. Isamu pushed through the glass doors at 6 a.m. when the place was nearly empty. Just a few hardcore gamblers and the cleaning staff preparing for the day shift. He showed the business card he'd found in Kenji's apartment to the manager. A thin man with a scarred face and the posture of someone who'd learned to make himself smaller to survive. "I'm looking for information about Detective Yamamoto," Isamu said quietly. "I know he comes here. I know he's connected to the people running this place." The manager's eyes flickered with recognition, then fear. "I don't know what you're talking about." Isamu placed 500,000 yen on the counter. The manager stared at it but didn't touch it. "The woman," Isamu continued, "the one they're holding at the sanctuary. Her name is Mizuki Sato. She's a surgeon. She's also the sister of someone you're keeping alive. Someone named Kenji. I need to know why. I need to know what this is all about." The manager glanced toward the back of the parlor, where a door led to the offices. His jaw clenched. "You're going to get yourself killed," the manager said finally. "And probably me too. But I'll tell you what I know. Not here. Tonight. There's a bar in Shinjuku called the Midnight. 10 p.m. Ask for Tanaka." Isamu spent the rest of the day preparing. He went to a contact he'd known since his corporate investigation days, a man named Hideo, who specialized in security systems and surveillance. For 50,000 yen, Hideo provided him with a small camera that could be hidden in a button, a listening device that looked like a hearing aid, and most importantly, a GPS tracker that could be activated remotely. "What are you getting into?" Hideo asked as he demonstrated the equipment. "Something that's going to end badly," Isamu said. "Probably for me." "Then why do it?" Isamu thought about Mizuki's face when she'd shown him the photograph of her brother. He thought about Akiko, supposedly dead for 18 months, carrying a tray of food to captives in a basement. He thought about Yuki, a homeless girl who knew too much about the sanctuary and the people being kept there. "Because someone has to," he said finally. The Midnight Bar was in a basement, accessible only through an unmarked door in an alley. The interior was all dark wood and dim lighting, the kind of place where conversations happened that never made it to the surface. Tanaka was waiting in a booth at the back, nursing a whiskey. He was older than Isamu expected, perhaps in his 60s, with the weathered face of someone who'd seen too much and lived to regret it. "You're the private investigator," Tanaka said. It wasn't a question. "The one asking questions about Kenji Sato and the sanctuary." "I am." "Then you need to understand something. This isn't about crime, not in the way you think. This is about survival. About people who were supposed to die but didn't. About a system that decided their lives were worth more than their deaths." Isamu sat down across from him. "Explain." Tanaka took a long drink. 15 years ago, there was a faction war within the Yakuza. Not the kind you read about in the news. The kind that happens in the shadows, where people disappear and no one asks questions. I was involved. I was younger then, more idealistic if you can believe that. I thought I was serving honor. I was actually serving greed and violence. He paused, collecting his thoughts. During that war, I was ordered to kill a man. A businessman who had borrowed money from the wrong people and couldn't pay it back. I was supposed to make it look like a suicide. Push him off a building, make it clean, make it disappear. "Did you?" Isamu asked. "No, I couldn't. He had a daughter. She was in medical school. She was brilliant. She was going to be a surgeon. And I couldn't take that away from the world." Tanaka's hands were shaking slightly. "So I faked his death instead. I created a body. A homeless man. Similar build, similar age. I staged an accident. And then I hid him. Kept him alive. Kept him hidden. The implications crashed over Isamu like a wave. Kenji Sato's father. Yes, Kenji was 10 years old when I saved his father's life. But his father couldn't go back to his family. He was officially dead. So instead, he watched his children grow up from the shadows. He watched Mizuki become a surgeon, just like he'd hoped. And he watched Kenji make a terrible choice. What choice? To join the Yakuza. To work for the same people who had ordered his father's death. Kenji thought he was honoring his father's memory by becoming powerful. By becoming someone who couldn't be touched. But what he actually did was put himself directly in the path of the organization that wanted his father dead. Tanaka finished his whiskey and signaled for another. 3 years ago, Kenji discovered the truth about his father. He found documents. He found proof that his father was alive. And he decided he was going to expose everything. The Yakuza's involvement in identity erasure, the corruption within the police department, all of it. He was going to bring the whole system down. So, they killed him, Isamu said. No. That's the part you don't understand. They couldn't kill him. Because if they killed him, Mizuki would never stop investigating. She's a surgeon. She's trained to look for evidence, to understand cause and effect. She would have figured it out. So instead, they did what they always do. They made him disappear. They faked his death. And they kept him alive, hidden, as leverage. Leverage for what? For Mizuki. They needed her to stop asking questions. They needed her to believe that her brother was gone, that investigating would only bring more pain. But they also needed to keep him alive because if he died, if they actually killed him, then Mizuki would have nothing to lose. She would become dangerous. Isamu's mind was moving through the logic of it, and it was horrifying in its elegance. The Yakuza had created a perfect trap. Keep Kenji alive but hidden. Use his existence as a threat against Mizuki. Ensure that any investigation she conducted would lead her directly into their hands. And Akiko? Isamu asked. The woman I saw at the sanctuary? Akiko was Kenji's girlfriend. She found out about his plan to expose the organization. She wanted to help him, so they killed her. Or rather, they made it look like they killed her. They staged the car accident, created a body, and then brought her back. She's been at the sanctuary for 18 months, kept alive as additional leverage against Kenji. If he tries to escape, if he tries to contact anyone, they threaten to actually kill her. This time for real. Tanaka leaned forward. You need to understand something, investigator. The sanctuary isn't just a place where they keep people. It's a statement. It's proof that the Yakuza can erase you from the world and bring you back whenever they want. It's proof that they control life and death. And it's proof that resistance is futile. Why are you telling me this? Isamu asked. Because I'm dying. I have cancer. 6 months, maybe less. And I'm tired of carrying this weight. I'm tired of knowing about all these people. Kenji's father, Kenji himself, Akiko, and dozens of others, living in that basement, waiting for death. I'm tired of being complicit in their suffering. Tanaka pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. Everything is in here. Names, dates, locations, bank records showing payments to Detective Yamamoto and others in the police department. Evidence of at least 37 cases of identity erasure over the past 15 years. It's enough to bring down the entire faction, and probably several high-ranking police officials. Why didn't you go to the authorities? Isamu asked. Because the authorities are part of the system. Detective Yamamoto isn't acting alone. He's part of a network that goes all the way up to the commissioner's office. Going to the police would just get me killed and make sure all this evidence disappears. Tanaka stood up. You have until midnight. That's when they're expecting you at the sanctuary. They're going to try to kill you. They're going to try to kill Mizuki. And they're going to try to make it look like a murder-suicide or an accident or something that will close the case forever. But if you're smart, if you're careful, you can use that evidence to expose them before they can silence you. How do I know I can trust you? Isamu asked. You don't. But you also don't have any other choice. Tanaka walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the bar. Isamu sat alone with the folder, his hands trembling slightly as he opened it and began to read. Yuki found him at 9 p.m. in a convenience store near the sanctuary. She appeared beside him as he was buying coffee, materializing out of the crowd like a ghost. "You came back," she said. "I need your help," Isamu said. "I need to get into the sanctuary without being seen. I need to find Mizuki and Kenji and get them out." Yuki nodded, as if she'd been expecting this. "I know a way. There's a tunnel that runs under the building. It was built during the war, when the temple was used as a shelter during air raids. Most people don't know about it, but I do." "How do you know about it?" "Because I lived there for 3 months, before I escaped." Yuki's young face was hard, ancient. "They tried to make me disappear too. They said I was a witness to something I shouldn't have seen. They brought me to the sanctuary and told me I was going to be kept alive, just like the others. But I was too young, too small. I could fit through spaces the adults couldn't. I found the tunnel. I escaped." "Why didn't you go to the police?" "Because the police brought me there. Detective Yamamoto himself. He said I was a runaway, a troublemaker, that I needed to be taught a lesson. He said no one would believe me if I told anyone. He said I would just disappear, and no one would care." Isamu felt something harden in his chest. The cruelty of it, the casual evil of using a child as leverage, made him want to do things that would probably get him killed. "Show me the tunnel," he said. The sanctuary looked different at night. The shadows were deeper, more absolute. The broken windows looked like eyes watching them approach. Yuki led him around the back, to a section of the building that had partially collapsed, revealing the basement level beneath. "There," she said, pointing to a narrow opening in the concrete. "That's the entrance. The tunnel goes under the building and comes out near the river. You can use it to get inside without being seen." Isamu squeezed through the opening. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for him to fit, and it smelled like decades of decay. His phone's flashlight illuminated crumbling brick and ancient graffiti. He moved slowly, carefully, aware that at any moment he could encounter someone. But the tunnel was empty. He emerged in what had once been the temple's basement storage room, the same place where he'd seen the 3 men and the doctor. The room was empty now, but there were signs of recent activity: fresh food containers, medical equipment, blankets. Isamu moved deeper into the building. He could hear voices now, coming from somewhere above. He climbed the stairs carefully, his hand on the knife in his jacket. The second floor was where they were keeping the captives. There were 6 rooms, each one locked with a heavy padlock. Through the small window in the first door, Isamu could see a man sitting on a cot, staring at nothing. In the second room, a woman was lying on a bed, her eyes closed. In the third room, he found Kenji. The man looked nothing like the photograph Mizuki had shown him. He was gaunt, hollow-eyed, with the kind of despair that came from months of captivity. But it was definitely him. Isamu could see the family resemblance to Mizuki in the shape of his face, the line of his jaw. Isamu picked the lock on the door. Kenji looked up, startled, his hand moving instinctively toward a weapon that wasn't there. "My name is Isamu Nakamura," he said quietly. "Your sister sent me. We're getting you out of here." Kenji's eyes filled with tears. "Mizuki, is she? She's alive, but she's in danger. We need to move. Now." They found Akiko in the 4th room. She was awake, alert, and she recognized Isamu immediately. "You were at the sanctuary before," she said. "I saw you, on the security camera. I thought they'd caught you." "Not yet," Isamu said, picking the lock. "We're leaving, all of us." But as they moved toward the stairs, they heard footsteps. Multiple people, moving quickly, converging on their location. Isamu's heart rate spiked. They'd been discovered. He grabbed Kenji's arm. "The tunnel. Go back the way I came. Get to the river. There's a girl named Yuki waiting outside. She'll help you." "What about you?" Kenji asked. "I'm going to buy you time." Isamu pushed them toward the stairs, then turned to face the approaching footsteps. He could see shadows moving in the hallway below, at least 3 people, maybe more. He drew his knife and waited. The first man to round the corner was Detective Yamamoto. He was holding a gun, and his face was twisted with rage. "Nakamura," he said. "I was wondering when you'd show up. You've made this very easy for us." "Where's Mizuki?" Isamu demanded. Upstairs, in the office. She's been waiting for you. She's been very cooperative, actually. Once we explained what would happen to her brother if she didn't cooperate. Isamu's mind was racing. Mizuki was upstairs. Kenji and Akiko were escaping through the tunnel. And he was standing in a hallway with a detective who had nothing to lose and every reason to kill him. You know what's interesting about your investigation? Yamamoto continued, moving closer. You actually figured out most of it. The identity erasure program, the corruption, all of it. But you made one critical mistake. What's that? Isamu asked, keeping his eyes on the gun. You assumed this was about money. You assumed the Yakuza was doing this for profit. But it's not about that at all. It's about control. It's about proving that we can erase people from the world and bring them back whenever we want. It's about showing that resistance is futile. And you, investigator, are about to become the perfect example of what happens when someone resists. Yamamoto raised the gun. Isamu moved. He'd trained in martial arts for 20 years, but a gun was faster than any technique. Isamu knew this. He also knew that the only way to survive was to close the distance before Yamamoto could fire. He lunged forward, his knife raised, moving with the kind of desperation that comes from knowing you're probably going to die. The gun went off. Isamu felt the bullet pass through his shoulder, burning like fire. But he didn't stop. He drove forward, his knife finding its target, and Yamamoto fell backward, blood spreading across his white shirt. The other officers appeared in the hallway, weapons drawn. Isamu turned and ran, moving toward the stairs, toward the tunnel, toward any chance of escape. Behind him, he could hear shouting, the sound of pursuit. He reached the basement and squeezed through the tunnel opening just as a bullet ricocheted off the concrete wall beside his head. The tunnel was narrow, confining, but it was also dark and full of places to hide. Isamu moved through it quickly, his shoulder screaming with pain, blood dripping onto the ancient brick. He emerged near the river just as Kenji, Akiko, and Yuki were disappearing into the darkness. He grabbed Yuki's arm. "Where's Mizuki?" he demanded. "The office, second floor. But they're coming. We have to go." "No," Isamu said. "You go. Get them to safety. I'm going back." "You'll die," Yuki said. "Probably," Isamu agreed. "But I'm not leaving her." He turned and ran back toward the sanctuary, even as the sound of sirens filled the night air. Behind him, he could hear Yuki calling his name, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Because somewhere in that building, Mizuki was waiting, and he'd made a promise, not in words, but in every action he'd taken since he'd met her, that he wouldn't leave her behind. The sanctuary loomed ahead, dark and terrible, a monument to cruelty and control. Isamu pushed through the broken doors and began climbing the stairs, moving toward whatever fate was waiting for him in the darkness above. The second floor of the sanctuary was chaos. Smoke drifted through the hallways. Someone had set fires to destroy evidence. Isamu could hear the sound of papers burning, the crackle of flames consuming years of documentation. He moved through the haze, his shoulder wound bleeding steadily, leaving a trail of blood on the concrete floor. He found the office at the end of the main corridor. The door was locked from the inside. Isamu could hear movement behind it, voices, one of them Mizuki's, tight with fear. He didn't bother picking the lock. He simply kicked the door open and stepped inside. Mizuki was sitting in a chair, her hands bound behind her back. Standing over her was a man Isamu didn't recognize. Older, perhaps in his 60s, with the kind of expensive suit that suggested real power rather than the performative power of a detective or mid-level Yakuza operative. Behind him, two armed men stood guard. "Investigator Nakamura," the older man said, smiling. "How dramatic. How utterly predictable. Did you really think you could save her? Did you really think this would end any way other than with both of you dead?" "Who are you?" Isamu asked, keeping his hand on his knife, even though he knew it was useless against two guns. "My name is Hiroshi Tanaka. I'm the one who created the identity erasure program. I'm the one who decided that certain lives were worth more hidden than visible. I'm the one who built this sanctuary and filled it with people who tried to resist the system." He paused, studying Isamu with cold eyes. "And I'm the one who's going to decide whether you and Dr. Sato live or die." The folder, Isamu said. The evidence. You know I have it. You know it's going to be released if anything happens to me. Hiroshi laughed. The folder from Tanaka. The dying man who thinks he can buy redemption by betraying us? We've already retrieved it. We have people watching every contact you've made in the past 24 hours. We know about Hideo and his surveillance equipment. We know about the internet cafe where you researched us. We know about Yuki and the tunnel. We know everything. He gestured to one of the armed men. Kill him. But before the man could raise his weapon, the lights went out. Not gradually, completely. The entire building plunged into absolute darkness. Isamu heard the sound of gunfire, wild shots fired into the void, then screaming. Someone had cut the power. Isamu moved by instinct, pulling Mizuki from the chair and pushing her toward the door. He could hear Hiroshi shouting orders, could hear the confusion of men who suddenly couldn't see. He used the darkness as cover, moving through the hallway, guiding Mizuki by touch. Behind them, more gunfire. The sound of people colliding in the darkness, unable to see their own hands in front of their faces. They reached the stairs. Isamu could see light now, emergency lighting, powered by backup generators beginning to activate. He could see the silhouettes of armed men moving through the building, searching for them. Down! He whispered to Mizuki, and they descended into the basement. The tunnel entrance was still open. Isamu pushed Mizuki through it, then turned to face the pursuing footsteps. He could see Detective Yamamoto's body still lying in the hallway. Blood pooled beneath him. The man was dead, but his death hadn't stopped anything. It had only accelerated the timeline. Isamu squeezed through the tunnel entrance just as bullets began ricocheting off the concrete around him. He moved through the darkness, his hands on the walls, guiding himself by touch and memory. Behind him he could hear pursuit, but it was slower now. The tunnel was too narrow for more than one person at a time. It was a bottleneck, a choke point. It was also a death trap if someone decided to collapse it behind them. He emerged near the river to find chaos. Police cars were everywhere, their lights painting the night in alternating red and blue. Ambulances, fire trucks. The entire area had been cordoned off. But in the middle of it all, he could see Yuki, standing with Kenji and Akiko, talking to a woman in a police uniform. The woman was Captain Akira Sato. Isamu's breath caught. Sato was Mizuki's cousin, a high-ranking officer in the Metropolitan Police Department. She was also, according to Tanaka's folder, one of the few honest cops left in the system, someone who had been investigating the identity erasure program for years but had been unable to gather enough evidence to move against it. Until now. Investigator Nakamura, Captain Sato said as Isamu emerged from the tunnel, pulling Mizuki behind him. You've had quite the evening. The evidence, Isamu said, breathing hard. The folder. Hiroshi Tanaka has it. He's destroying it. No, he's not, Captain Sato said calmly. Because I already have copies. Multiple copies. Stored in secure locations. Tanaka may have thought he was destroying the original, but he was actually destroying a decoy. We switched them 3 hours ago. She gestured to the officers around her. We've been monitoring this location for weeks. We've been waiting for the right moment to move in. You provided that moment when you exposed Yamamoto and forced them to accelerate their timeline. Sometimes the best investigations are the ones that push the criminals into making mistakes. Isamu felt something inside him collapse. The tension, the fear, the desperate certainty that he was going to die in that sanctuary. It all drained away, leaving only exhaustion. Mizuki, he said, turning to her. Are you... She was already moving toward him, her hands reaching for his shoulder, for the wound that was still bleeding. Her surgeon's mind had already assessed the damage, was already calculating treatment protocols. We need to get you to a hospital, she said. The bullet went through the deltoid. There might be nerve damage. There might be arterial involvement. I'm fine, Isamu said, but he wasn't. He was bleeding, he was in pain, and he was beginning to understand the full weight of what had just happened. The hospital was Shibuya Medical Center, where Mizuki worked. She had them take Isamu directly to surgery, where she supervised the removal of the bullet and the repair of the damaged tissue. It took 4 hours. When it was done, Isamu was sedated, bandaged, and admitted for observation. He woke to find Mizuki sitting beside his bed, still wearing her surgical scrubs, her eyes red from crying. "Your brother?" he asked. "Safe, in protective custody. Captain Sato has him in a secure location. They're going to move him to a new identity, a new life, somewhere safe. He wants to testify against Hiroshi Tanaka and the others. He wants to help bring down the entire system. And Akiko? Also safe. She's going to need therapy, psychological support. What they did to her. What they did to all of them." Mizuki's voice broke. "It's going to take years for her to recover. But at least she's alive. At least she has the chance." Isamu reached for her hand. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better. I'm sorry I let them—" "You saved my life," Mizuki interrupted. "You came back for me. You risked everything. I'm a surgeon, Isamu. I understand the anatomy of survival. I understand what it takes to keep someone alive. And I understand that you did that for me. You kept me alive." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you." The investigation that followed was massive. Captain Sato used the evidence from Tanaka's folder to launch a full inquiry into the identity erasure program. Over the course of 3 months, 37 people were discovered alive in various hidden locations throughout Tokyo. Some had been missing for years. Some had families who had grieved them and moved on. Some had been so thoroughly erased that they no longer remembered who they were. Hiroshi Tanaka was arrested and charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, conspiracy, and dozens of other crimes. Detective Yamamoto's death was ruled self-defense. The officers who had been working with him were arrested and charged with corruption and conspiracy. But the investigation also revealed something deeper. A network of corruption that extended far beyond the Yakuza and into the highest levels of the police department and the judiciary. Politicians were implicated. Corporate executives were implicated. The scandal consumed the news for months. In the end, 3 police commissioners resigned. 17 officers were arrested, and the identity erasure program was officially dismantled. Its records destroyed, its victims given new identities and compensation. Tanaka, the old man from the pachinko parlor, died before the trial began. But his testimony, recorded before his death, was used to convict Hiroshi Tanaka and secure the convictions of everyone involved in the program. 6 months later, Isamu stood in Mizuki's apartment, looking out at the Tokyo skyline. His shoulder had healed well. The physical therapy had been painful but effective. The psychological wounds were slower to heal. Mizuki came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist. "Kenji called," she said. "He's doing well. He's in Hokkaido now, working as a financial consultant under a new name. He says he's happy. He says he's finally free." "And your father?" Isamu asked. "He's still in hiding, but now it's by choice. He decided he didn't want to go back to his old life. He's living quietly in Kyoto, working as a gardener. He sees Kenji sometimes. They're rebuilding their relationship. It's slow, but it's real." Isamu turned to face her. "What about us? What are we rebuilding?" Mizuki smiled. "Something new. Something that doesn't have to be defined by what happened in that sanctuary. Something that's just us." She kissed him, and for the first time since the investigation began, Isamu felt like he could breathe. The weight of the case, the burden of the evidence, the horror of what he'd discovered, it all seemed to lift, at least for a moment. "I love you," Mizuki said. "I know it's fast. I know it's probably not rational. But I love you." "I love you too," Isamu said. And he meant it. 3 months later, Yuki came to find him. She was no longer homeless. Captain Sato had helped her get into a youth shelter, and she was attending school again. She was still young, still carrying the trauma of what she'd experienced. But she was alive, and she was healing. "I wanted to thank you," she said when they met at a cafe near the sanctuary. The building had been demolished. The city had decided it was too tainted by history to preserve. "For coming back, for not giving up. You saved my life," Isamu said. "You cut the power. You made it possible for us to escape." Captain Sato helped with that, Yuki admitted. She had people positioned around the building. She was waiting for the right moment. But I was the one who knew where the electrical box was. I was the one who knew how to cut the power without killing everyone in the building. Isamu smiled. You're going to be okay, you know. You're going to have a good life." "I know," Yuki said, "because I'm alive, and that's more than I thought I'd ever be." The final piece of the puzzle came 6 months after that, when Isamu received a letter from a law firm in Kyoto. It was from Kenji's father, the man who had been erased from the world 15 years ago and kept alive in a basement for the past 3 years. The letter was simple. It thanked Isamu for saving his son. It thanked him for saving Akiko. It thanked him for exposing the system that had tried to erase them all. But at the end, there was a single sentence that made Isamu understand, finally, what all of this had been about. "You gave us back our lives. Now we get to choose what to do with them." Isamu kept that letter on his desk. He framed it. And whenever he felt the weight of the investigation, whenever he remembered the darkness of the sanctuary and the desperation of those final moments, he would read it and remember that sometimes saving a life was worth risking your own. Epilogue. 2 years later, Isamu and Mizuki were married in a small ceremony at a shrine in Kyoto. Kenji was there, standing beside his sister. Akiko was there too, holding Kenji's hand, her eyes bright with the kind of joy that comes from having survived the unsurvivable. Captain Sato was there, in civilian clothes, smiling for the first time in years. And Yuki was there, no longer a homeless girl, but a high school student with a future. The sanctuary was gone, demolished and replaced with a park. The identity erasure program was gone, dismantled and exposed. The people who had run it were in prison, serving sentences that would keep them there for the rest of their lives. But the most important thing was that the people who had been erased were alive. They had their identities back. They had their lives back. And they had the chance to choose who they wanted to be. As Isamu stood beside Mizuki, exchanging vows, he understood that this was what it meant to be alive. Not just to breathe, not just to exist, but to have the freedom to choose your own path, to love who you wanted to love, to build something real and lasting with another person. The rain fell softly on the shrine, washing away the past, preparing the ground for new growth. And in that moment, with Mizuki's hand in his, Isamu knew that everything he'd risked, everything he'd sacrificed, had been worth it. Because they were alive, all of them, and that was everything.